Not all stories are told in daylight. Here we tell you the stories they warn you not to repeat, and the ones they pray aren't true. Ghost stories are like old houses. They linger, waiting for someone to step inside. Tonight I have 3 for you, each one different, each one tied to the place we passed by without thinking. A manor that refused to stay silent, a house where a diary told the truth no one wanted, and an asylum where a patient was never discharged. Settle in, because these aren't just stories about buildings, they're about what refuses to leave them. They say the old Miller's Crossing Inn was cursed from the first nail driven into its frame. You won't find it standing anymore. The county tore it down decades ago, and the road was rerouted to keep people away. But the stories, they never left. Ask around, especially among the old-timers, and the tale comes quick, like smoke from a chimney that refuses to die. The inn sat on the edge of the forest, where the trade road cut through. 2 stories. Wood frame, plain as could be. 3 rooms upstairs, a common room below, a stable out back. Nothing about it should have stood out, and yet it did. The Millers ran it. Husband, wife, and their daughter. Nobody remembers the girl's name anymore. They just call her the daughter. She was maybe 16, pale and quiet. She was always seen at the upstairs window, watching. That's how it started. Travellers talked about her face pressed to the glass. People in wagons swore her eyes followed them as they passed, and then, little by little, guests began to disappear. The first was a trader. He slept in one of the upstairs rooms, his wagon tied in the stable. But by morning, he was gone. His belongings remained, his boots under the bed, his coat on the peg, coins on the bedside table. But he himself had vanished, as though the night had just swallowed him whole. It happened again a few weeks later, and again, and every time the rooms were neat, nothing stolen, no signs of a struggle, but neighbours swore they heard the same thing on those nights. A slow, patient knocking from the inside of the locked rooms. And always, the last person seen at the inn had mentioned the same detail. They'd noticed the daughter at the window before they went to bed. By autumn, the inn had earned its name, the inn that eats. The stories grew sharper. Some said she wasn't just at the window anymore, that she wandered the road barefoot, dressed in white, that she knocked on the doors of wagons at night, politely, softly, always asking to be let in. And if you did, you didn't last a week. Wagons turned up abandoned, reins dragged in the dirt, belongings left untouched. The Millers swore they knew nothing, but the fear hollowed them out. Travellers swore the parents themselves looked drained, worn thinner each season, like they were starving while food sat in front of them. By winter's end, the inn had closed. Not long after, the entire family disappeared. Some claimed they fled west, but others said they were seen, all 3 of them, walking into the forest at dusk, the daughter leading, her white dress vanishing between the pines. The inn rotted for decades, roof sagging, shutters torn, doors swinging loose. Kids from nearby towns dared each other to go inside. Some came back pale, claiming they heard footsteps upstairs when no one was there. Others swore they saw her, face in the window, watching, exactly as travellers had described. Then came the hunters. One autumn, a group searching deer sign near the crossing found bones in a shallow hollow of the forest, not scattered like an animal's kill, but arranged. Knees drawn up, hands folded like someone had sat cross-legged until they froze. The bones were too old to be the missing salesman, too young to be anyone's grandfather. Nobody claimed them, they were buried, quiet, without a name. The county finally had the inn torn down. They thought that would be the end of it, but the stories didn't stop. Truckers on the bypass still see a faint lantern glow in the trees where no house stands. Some ignore it, some don't. One man, a driver out of Duluth, pulled over after midnight, certain someone was flagging him down. He left his cab idling on the shoulder. They found him 3 days later in a ditch 15 miles away, sitting cross-legged with his hands folded like he was praying. His hair had gone white. He never spoke again. Others talk about her still, the girl in white standing on the roadside shoulder, face pale, eyes dark, one hand lifted like she's knocking on an invisible door. And sometimes she doesn't wait on the road. One couple staying at a motel near the bypass said they woke to a soft rapping on the door at 3 a.m. Not frantic, not loud, just polite, measured. When they checked, the hallway was empty, but the next morning they found small, wet footprints on a carpet inside their room, leading straight to the window. The Miller family is gone, the inn is gone, but the story hasn't ended. The daughter remains, not chasing, not warning, just knocking, patient as ever. Maybe for the door to open, or maybe for someone to look back. I took the posting at Greyhaven Lighthouse in the autumn of '98. It wasn't a romantic choice. I wasn't chasing adventure or testing myself against the elements. I just needed work. The Coast Authority was hiring for a seasonal watch, 6 months alone, keeping the beacon running while the storms rolled in off the North Atlantic. The locals made it sound simple. Keep the light burning, keep the log, don't get clever. Suited me just fine. The pay was steady, the food allowance was generous, and I thought the solitude might even do me good. Greyhaven itself was nothing but a rock at the edge of the world, sheer cliffs dropping into black water, gulls screaming overhead. The lighthouse rose from the centre of it, all iron and weathered brick, its lantern room wrapped in glass like a crown. There was a keeper's cottage too, though I hardly used it. Most of my hours were spent in the tower, watching the machinery turn. The ferry captain who dropped me off wouldn't come closer than the supply dock. He sat on the deck, rain dripping from his hat, and called out as I climbed onto the pier. "Keep the light steady," he said. "That's all that matters. The light doesn't go out, not for anything." It sounded more like a warning than advice. I laughed it off at the time, but by the end of my first week, I'd find myself repeating his words without meaning to, like a prayer. The day settled into a rhythm. I woke with the tide, the whole tower groaning as the sea held itself against the rock below. Breakfast was always the same. Bread gone stale too soon, tea so strong it stripped the lining of your throat. Then, up the iron stairs to tend the lamp. The lamp was old, in a normal Fresnel lens that looked more like a cathedral window than a piece of machinery. I polished the glass, trimmed the wick, checked the fuel lines. It was all in the manual written decades earlier, and the steps never changed. If I followed them, the light kept turning, casting its long white arm over the sea. The rest of the day was for logs and repairs, weather readings, oil counts, the occasional coat of paint, when salt air stripped things down to metal. I kept the logbook tidy, each entry in block letters, just like at the training office had drilled it into us. Nights were harder. The gulls went quiet, and the only sound was a steady thrum of waves and the creak of the staircase. The lantern lights made the glass walls glow, so I could see my own reflection in them as I passed. Sometimes I swore I caught movement in the reflection when I wasn't moving at all. And then there were the footsteps. At first I thought it was an old tower settling. Metal expands, contracts, the sea shakes the foundation. But these were too regular, too heavy. A slow tread on the spiral stairs, rising one floor, then stopping. I'd climbed down with a lamp, heart thudding, only to find the staircase empty, the door bolted shut. Every time I told myself it was nothing, just the sea playing tricks with the sound. But the longer I stayed, the less convincing that lie became. By the second week, there were entries in the log I don't remember writing. My handwriting, neat, precise, but the words weren't mine. Dates from 30 years earlier. Weather notes for storms I had never seen. It should have scared me more than it did, but I told myself I was tired, that the isolation was bleeding into my head. I closed the book, set it aside, and swore I'd watch myself more closely. Still, the thought nagged at me, because when I turned the page at night, there was a sentence written dead center, not in my hand at all. The light must never go out. The first real sign that something wasn't right came during a calm night in October. The sea was flat as glass, not a breath of wind, yet the keeper's door on the ground floor slammed hard enough to rattle the stairwell. I bolted down 3 flights with a lantern swinging in my hand. The door was closed, bolt still in place. But the sound had been real. It had echoed through the tower like a gunshot. After all that, the small things multiplied. The lantern room would turn by itself, the lens locking onto the sea even when the mechanism wasn't engaged. I'd set it straight only to find it shifted again a few minutes later. It always pointed to the same patch of black water. Some nights I'd wake, coughing, the sheets damp beneath me. At first I thought the roof was leaking, but the damp wasn't rain. It was seawater. My pillow smelled like the sea. The logbook changed too. Whole pages filled themselves with neat rows of script, reporting storms that weren't there, ships that never passed. Once I opened it to find an entry written only hours earlier, signed with my name, except I hadn't written it. Then I saw him. It was late, the wind pushing against the glass with a low moan. I was climbing the last flight of stairs when movement flickered across the lantern room. A man's figure, tall, gaunt, walking the outer catwalk. His head was bent, beard ragged, coat flapping in the wind. I froze, my throat dry. But when I shoved open the door, the platform was empty, just the glass dome and the sea beyond it. The figure was gone, as if he had melted into the storm. That night, I wrote in the log with shaking hands. Saw something outside the lantern. Keeper, reflection. Must be tired. Even as I wrote it, I didn't believe myself. By November, the storms came harder. The sea roared night and day, spray breaking high enough to rattle the glass of the lantern room. I was used to noise by then, but the quiet moments were worse, the pauses between gusts when the whole tower seemed to lean forward and listen. The logbook wasn't just filling itself anymore. It was answering me. I'd note the weather, wind steady, visibility poor. Below it, in a hand thin and jagged. Winds rising, visibility lost, keeper must remain. I stopped opening it after a while. It felt like a conversation I didn't want to have. The shadow came back too, not just on the catwalk. Sometimes I'd pass the lantern glass and see his reflection where mine should be. A man with hollow eyes staring straight through me. The first time I spun around so fast I cracked my shin on the railing, but there was no one there, just my own pale face staring back. The storm that broke me started with the sound I'd been dreading. Footsteps on the spiral stairs. Heavy, slow. Each one matched my own heartbeat. I carried the lamp higher, telling myself it was the wind knocking the stairwell around. But the steps kept perfect pace with me. One flight down, then two. Always following, never gaining, never falling behind. When I reached the lantern room, I slammed the iron hatch shut behind me. The lamp threw wild shadows across the walls, and that's when I saw it. The shadow wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, standing just beyond the lamp's glow. Tall, bent at the shoulders, coat dripping as though he'd come fresh from the sea. His face was a blur, but the beard was there, the hollow stare, the shape I'd glimpsed in the glass. He didn't move towards me, he didn't need to. The whole tower felt like it was leaning into him, like every stone and bolt belonged to him now. And in the howl of the storm I heard his voice, not from his mouth, but from the walls themselves. The lights must never go out. I don't remember grabbing the logbook, but it was in my hands. My last entry was scrawled, ink blotted from the shake of my fingers. Storm breaking, shadow in the tower. If this is found, the light is his. The beacon blazed brighter than it should have, the lens turning, though I hadn't touched the mechanism. Outside, the sea was a wall of black water, the storm swallowing horizon and sky alike. The footsteps came again, not below this time, behind me. I turned, and the shadow was closer, a step from the lamp as though about to place its hand on the wick. I backed into the railing, heart hammering. "What do you want?" I shouted, though the storm almost swallowed the words. The voice came again, rattling through the steel, the glass, the stone itself. The light must never go out. And then the storm broke. Wind slammed against the lantern room, the beacon flared, and for a moment the shadow's face was lit clear as glass. The drowned man's face, gaunt and pale, eyes hollow but fixed with terrible purpose. When the light surged, he vanished, gone like a flame snuffed. I don't remember climbing down, I don't remember sleeping. The next thing I knew, the storm had passed. The sea was calm, the sky a washed-out grey. The logbook was open on my desk, my entry from the night before was gone. In its place, written in that same thin hand, "The keeper remains, the light never goes out." This was my last season at Greyhaven. I never went back, but sometimes when I see a lighthouse on the horizon, I catch myself wondering, is the shadow still there? Is the light still burning because of him, or in spite of him? And if I ever really left at all? Harrowick Asylum had been empty for more than 50 years when Jonah took the night watch contract. Empty was the word they used in the briefing pack, printed in a beige font that made everything sound fine. It wasn't the sort of job he imagined doing when he was younger, but it was catching a hand, steady work through the winter, and nights with no one to bother him. He told himself the quiet would be good. He told himself a lot of things that first week. By day, the demolition crews peeled the place into layers, plaster, wire, brick, till the old hospital showed its ribs. By night, Jonah locked the gate, checked the fence line with a torch, and walked the miles of corridor the crews hadn't taken yet. He carried a battered thermos, a radio that mostly picked up static, and a ring of keys that all felt the same in the dark. On the map they issued him, Harrowick was a tidy capital E. 3 long ward blocks, a spine of admin, and stubby side corridors where laundries and kitchens had once steamed. In the flesh it was less clear, the floors sloped where foundations had settled, and the light wells that once made winter bearable were now just holes for cold to fall through. Pipes clanged, window frames quivered in their brick. Once an hour the wind found a new seam that made the whole place hum. The first 3 nights were the quiet he'd been promised. Jonah learned the building's language, a door that didn't latch, a stair tread that sang, a draft that swam down one corridor and up the other like a tide. He grinned at himself for jumping at his own footsteps and settled into a rhythm. He made rounds, he logged times, he heated soup. He dozed in the chair behind the security desk and jolted awake at the scrape of leaves outside. On the 4th night, he heard pacing. It came when he was in the central admin wing, beneath a run of offices with their glass doors long since kicked in. The steps were steady, measured, too heavy for cats or raccoons, too regular for anything blown by wind. He could feel it through his boots in the old wood. A man walking a ward. A guard making rounds, or a patient wearing grooves into tile. He climbed the stairs with his torch lifted and found dust so thick he could see his own tracks from the previous night. The corridor above was lined with wheelchairs and gurneys the crew had dragged together. Nothing moved. The air tasted like plaster. He stood long enough that his breath fogged and faded and only went down when the radio hissed in his pocket and reminded him how stupid he looked pointing a light at nothing. On the 6th night, the east wing doors creaked as he passed. The boards the crew had nailed up had come loose in the wind, and the plywood hung crooked in its frame like a tired jaw. Jonah wedged his shoulders into it and slipped inside. Cold air pooled along the floor like water. His breath made little ghosts. He swept his light through the rooms, rusted bed frames, peeling walls, an old enamel basin with a crack like a lightning fork across its bowl. And for no reason, his throat went dry. As he reached the midpoint of the ward, a door clicked shut behind him. Just a tired hinge, he told himself. The sort of thing the foreman would fix with a hammer and 3 nails. Then another door clicked shut. Another. By the time he turned, the corridor behind him was a line of closed mouths. Very funny, he said to the building. He put his hands on the nearest knob and found it stiff with paint. It needed a good shove. The second door moved easier. The third swung at a touch. Halfway back, he laughed at himself because he couldn't help it, and the sound travelled down the wall and fell apart in the corners. On the 7th night, he left his thermos on the guard desk and came back to find it standing upright in the middle of the corridor, 30 feet away. No wet ring on the desk, no splash, no footprints on the dusty floor between one and the other. He picked it up and held it like it was evidence, then felt stupid and took a long swallow. The tea had cooled. He thought about quitting. Then he thought about the rent. He thought about how the foreman looked at him like a man doing math. He thought, ridiculous as it was, about the idea that the building didn't want him gone so much as it wanted him there, watching, recording. He didn't like the way the thought settled behind his ribs. He didn't like how true it felt with the keys in his hand. On the 9th night, Jonah saw a figure. It stood in a second-floor window of Ward 6A, the East Block's northern end, and where the glass had held longer than anywhere else. Pale, motionless, hands pressed to the pane. Jonah didn't think, he just ran. Boots ringing on the stairs, breath burning, the torch bouncing on a wild circle up the walls. The window was empty by the time he reached it. Dust thick on the sill, paint flaking like old soap. 5 prints pressed into the dust. 5 long fingers set so deep the flakes had lifted in little curls. He stood with his hand braced on the crumbling frame and let his heart slow. The prints looked fresh. He pressed his own palm alongside them and felt stupid doing it. And then felt worse because his wasn't as deep. He had to push to make his hands show at all. Wind, he said out loud. Or some kid got in today. His voice didn't convince him. He didn't tell the foreman. He didn't write that part in the log. On the way down, a metal tray rattled on a stair he hadn't touched, clanging its way to the landing as if something had palmed it off a rail. He squeezed the torch so hard the knurling bit his skin and kept walking until he could stand outside under a starless sky and breathe the air the building hadn't held first. The next morning, the crew found all the doors on 6A closed. They joked about it over cigarettes, they groused about kids sneaking in, they had a laugh about ghosts. Then, the youngest of them, a lad with a buzz cut and a tattoo of a swallow he hadn't gotten for luck, said he'd seen someone in the admin block the day before and hadn't wanted to be the first one to say it. He held up his hands to show he wasn't shaking. But he was. The foreman told him to go pull copper with Gary from the west wing where there was daylight. They didn't say don't tell stories, but it was there in their faces. That night, the intercom spoke. The system was dead, everybody knew it. The boards had been pulled, the wiring was green lace, so the switchboard was nothing but holes where lights had been. Jonah was halfway down the main hall, counting his steps without meaning to, when the little speaker above the nurse's desk crackled and the voice calmly said, "Rounds." He froze. The radio hissed in his pocket again as if it wanted to be relevant. He reached for it and stopped. The speaker crackled again. "Rounds." Not angry, not pleading. A tone like a nurse with a clipboard, with like a habit too old to stop. "Which ward?" Jonah said before his brain could tell his mouth to be quiet. The intercom made a small sound like a throat clearing. "We don't leave them alone." The voice wasn't male or female, so much as tired. Then the speaker died. The building went back to pipes and wind. He stood for a long time with his hands in his coat and the radio buzzing in his ear like a fly. He wanted to leave, and his feet wouldn't. He wanted to call someone, but who would he call? The police, to tell them an intercom had spoken to him in a building with no power? The foreman, to tell him the walls had a job left to do that nobody now on payroll could do? He made himself walk his route. He made himself tick boxes on a sheet with a pencil. The pencil shook. Jonah started to see the place differently after all. The rooms weren't just rooms, they were the shape of all things that had been in them. Beds and bodies and hands on rails. He noticed where paint had worn in lines where palms slid over and over. He noticed in 6A a restraining strap folded on a bed, how it moved most nights from drawer to mattress and back again like someone was practicing neatness. He moved it back to the drawer twice and then stopped because the third time it was laid out with the buckles polished and something in him gave way at that small kindness. He told himself a kid was coming in at dusk to scare him. He tried to imagine the smirk he'd put his boot through when he caught them. He staked out a stairwell with his torch off and listened to the building breathe. A cart rattled somewhere above his head without rolling. The air smelled like old water. He fell asleep in the chair behind the desk on the 12th night and woke choking. He was on the floor on his back, eyes tearing, throat raw like he'd swallowed smoke. But there was no smoke, there was no one. The radio lay on its side, the plastic casing warm as if someone had held it. After that, the loneliness wasn't calm. He filled a second thermos. He ate standing up. He turned on more lights and then turned them off again because they made the shadows too firm. He checked the double locks twice, then a third time, then swore at himself and did it a fourth. He heard pacing in the east wing most nights now. 16 steps, turn, 16 steps back, and found himself walking on that rhythm without wanting to. His boots fit the pattern like feet finding a friend's stride. The figure at the window returned on a sleet-rattled Thursday. Same pain, same posture, hands flat against the glass. Jonah stood on the landing below long enough to decide not to run. He climbed slowly, step after step, the torch pointed at the floor like he was walking into a church. The window was empty when he reached it. The prints were deeper. Where the heel of a right palm should be, the paint had smudged down in 4 thin lines as if the hand had slid a little and tried to catch itself. He took a scrap of plaster and scratched 4 lines next to those 4. His were jagged and ragged and shallow. He didn't know why he did it. He didn't know why he felt immediately like he'd said something rude. On the 15th night, the wind fell away and the whole asylum listened. That was how it felt. The radiators didn't tick, the pipes didn't crack, the windows held their breath. Jonah's boots were too loud in the corridor, so he walked softer and softer until he was stepping around the circles of plaster left by the crew's hammers, as if not to wake them. He told himself this was a stupid way to be. He told himself he'd be laughing at breakfast when the world was sun and diesel again. He cut through Ward 6A on the way back to the desk and paused because a little white mound sat in the middle of the hallway like a punctuation mark. Salt. In a paper cup. Measured level. A neat thing underlined by someone who cared about neat things. He stared at it until the hair on his arms prickled. He walked past without touching it and hated himself for that, like he was stepping around a tray in a room where someone was waiting. He found a note under a rusted bed frame, folded once. He wasn't looking for it. He'd knelt to pick up a bolt and his fingers closed on paper. The ink had gone brown, the edges were soft. The hand that wrote it hadn't been sure if it was allowed to write. It said, Patient 421, left unclaimed. Says he will not leave until someone remembers. Do not let him be alone. If he paces, answer him. If he knocks, knock back. If you don't, he comes inside. He read it 3 times and then a 4th, waiting for his stomach to settle. The note had the same tone the intercom had, not a plea, not a threat. A rule. The way nurses say rules when they're tired of enforcing them and do it anyway. As if on cue, from somewhere deep in the east wing came the sound of 3 slow raps. Not on a door. In this building, every sound travelled. But he knew in his bones it was a room with a bed and a window, and a cup of salt sitting in the hall. He put the note in his pocket and stood very still. He could knock back. He could do something that would make this night the kind of story you only tell when a bottle is low. He could refuse because that is a choice too. The raps came again, in 3s. And then the silence deepened until it had weight. He didn't knock. He ran. He ran down the corridor and past the desk and out into the air that smelled like rain over concrete. He bent with his hands on his knees in the lee of an ambulance bay wall and listened to his heart pound in his throat. He thought of the foreman's face if he said the building knocked and I ran. He thought of all the times he had been a man who stayed when staying was the hard thing and hated himself equally for that and for this. He went back in. He didn't want to. He did it anyway because leaving would have been worse. The corridor was empty. The cup of salt hadn't moved. The knock didn't come again. Jonah made another round of the building. He walked through admin and down past the dead lifts and back up the service stairs because the main ones now felt too exposed. In the west block, a door that hadn't latched in months now fit its frame like it always belonged there. He jiggled it and it held. It felt the sort of fact that meant too much. He was behind the desk again by 3, pretending the radio had wisdom in it, when a bell chimed. Not a fire bell, not a phone. A little ding of an elevator announcing itself. Once. Twice. The lifts were braced open and dead, and had been for years. He stood until the ding didn't come again and wrote in the logbook in block letters. 3 a.m, noise, admin, check AM. He underlined noise like it owed him an apology. He quit the job in the morning. He hadn't planned to. He had planned to tough it out and collect a month's pay and walk away with a story that made him look stubborn instead of spooked. But at breakfast, with concrete dust still clinging to his hair and the note a rectangle against his thigh, he told the foreman he was done. The foreman looked at him with a mix of relief and frustration, like men do sometimes when someone else says out loud the thing they weren't brave enough to say. "Fine," he said. "There's always another pair of boots." Demolition took the east wing the next week. The block folded like a bad book, floors and beds and windows falling into themselves with a groan that turned to dust halfway to the ground. The crew hosed the air until it ran grey into the drains and kept hosing. By lunch, the lot looked like a war that had been paved over. By nightfall, there was a chain-link fence with a sign that said future site of Harrowick Health Centre, and a rendering of building with glass and cedar and sunlight pouring through. Jonah kept the note. He told himself he'd throw it out and then didn't. He told himself he'd stop thinking about cups of salt and knocking back. And then he lay awake some nights counting to 16 without meaning to, and not liking what came after 16. He didn't talk about it. He moved on to other work. When he drove past the new centre, he did it fast. He didn't look at the windows, and when he did, he hated himself for doing it and for the way relief punched through him like light when no pale face stood behind the glass. Months later, a friend at the crew called him to say the automatic doors at the new place hissed open at odd hours with nobody near, and that night staff swore sometimes there was pacing on the empty second floor. 16 steps, turn, 16 back. It made him feel small and stubborn and young again to hear it. He said nothing. He turned the note over in his pocket while they talked, as if it were a coin. The paper had softened with handling, the fold had frayed, the line about knocking back had a small smear where someone's thumb had pressed hard. He couldn't stop imagining the hand that had written it, hurried but neat, because neatness was a defence. He pictured a nurse or a junior doctor or an orderly who had loved someone in a way that didn't get written down. He kept reading the last line as if it would change. If you don't, he comes inside. The sentence hung there without heat. It wasn't a threat, it was information. He held on to that when he woke in the night, and when he thought he heard someone walking down the hall outside his flat, and counted to 16, and then lay very still. The health centre opened. People in bright scrubs walked the corridors. The place smelled like lemon cleaner and healing. In the afternoons, old women in wool coats sat on the low wall by the car park and watched the buses. On cold evenings, when the glass fogged, someone inside would wipe a circle with their sleeve and think of nothing but their appointment time and a warm drink afterwards. Some nights, if you stood in the lot and looked towards the east wing, you could imagine someone standing at an upper window, patient gown pale as mist, hands pressed to the glass. That was just imagination, you'd tell yourself. That was just the way new buildings inherit old shapes, the way children inherit their grandfather's ears. Jonah stood there once on a night like that. He held the note and almost threw it in a bin by the bench, but couldn't. He put it back in his pocket and felt both braver and more foolish for it. Something like a bell chimed behind the doors. He couldn't hear it. He felt it in his teeth and the bones of his ears, the way you feel a train coming before you hear it. He didn't go inside. He didn't need a reason. He didn't need to finish the story to know how it ended. He folded the note again and along its old line and thought of a cup of salt set in a hall, neat as kindness, and a voice on the intercom that shouldn't speak and did. Browns. He did what he should have done that night in Ward 6A. He lifted his hand, touched the rail of the low wall where his palm would leave no mark, and knocked 3 times. Softly, the kind of sound that you make when you don't want to wake anyone, only let them know you're there. He listened. Nothing answered but wind. Maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't for him to measure. Harrowick is gone. They salted it with daylight and new paint. The county closed the file. The health centre's automatic doors open smoothly and let people in and out. The nurses write down numbers in neat rows. The lifts make small polite dings, and the lights hum. Somewhere between the brick of the old foundations and the glass of the new, a shape is still learning how to leave. It walks 16 steps and turns, it knocks and waits, it asks politely for salt. It keeps a ward that no longer exists. Patient 421 was never on the ledger. There's no discharge form, there's only a line on a note left under a bed that should have been hauled to scrap, written by a hand that knew rules and kindness both. Left unclaimed will not leave until someone remembers. If you've ever forgotten someone you shouldn't have, you know what that line feels like. Jonah goes home at night and doesn't count his steps, he doesn't listen for pacing. If he wakes and hears his old building creak, he lets it. If he dreams of windows and palms pressed flat and dust taking fingerprints like snow, he doesn't tell anyone about it in the morning. The note lives in a drawer where he can reach it, and sometimes he does, and sometimes he doesn't. It will never be proof, it will always be evidence. That's enough. You can live a long time on less. Harrowick is a health centre now. It helps people on certain nights when the air is cold and the glass is clean. Someone will stand by the east windows and wonder why they feel company and can't name it. They'll lay their palm onto the pane without knowing why. From the car park, if you're looking up at the right moment, you'll see two hands meet on either side of the glass, one that fogs it and one that never does. You'll think it's a trick of the light. You'll be right, but also you won't. If you happen to count to 16 and turn, no one will blame you. If you happen to knock back softly just once, there's a chance that somewhere a patient who was never discharged will take one more step towards the door. And if no one remembers him, not really, then he will keep his rounds. That's what he knows how to do. The new building hums in the dark like a thing contented with his work. The old one hums inside it like a note you can feel but can't quite hear. Between them, a man who refused to leave until someone remembered learns how to be alone less often. There are worse endings. If you've made it this far into the broadcast, thank you for listening. I hope tonight's stories keep you company and maybe left you glancing over your shoulder once or twice. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, it helps way more than you think, and consider subscribing for more nights like this one. And until next time, may the dark stay quiet, and the company you keep be only your own.